My guest today has been walking into rooms that most people only read about: the United Nations, the World Bank, COP summits, since she was 18 years old. But what makes her story remarkable isn't just the spaces she's worked in, it's what she's done with that access. Renata Koch Alvarenga is the founder and executive director of EmpoderaClima, a nonprofit advancing women's empowerment for climate action across Latin America and the Caribbean. A Harvard graduate, she's worked at the United Nations, the World Bank, and the British Mission in Brazil. And in 2024, she was named a Forbes Under 30 honoree as their social impact cover and awarded the Beautiful Forces grant by Estée Lauder and Vital Voices. She's also a young leader in UNDP and Samsung's Generation 17 initiative and a Planet Fellow at the United Nations Foundation. She founded EmpoderaClima at 22 after noticing something that may seem obvious now but really wasn't back then. The people most affected by climate change were the least represented in the rooms where climate decisions were being made: women, youth, people from the global south. So she built something to close that gap, starting, as she'll tell you, as just a tab on someone else's website. In this conversation, we talk about the hidden weight behind the glamour of global stages, what growing up in Brazil taught her about justice, how she thinks about burnout and rest as a serious strategy, and a full circle moment at COP30 that brought her to tears. We also get into what she'd tell anyone thinking about starting a youth-led initiative, and the myth that she wants to bust about doing it right. Welcome to Next Gen Doers. Renata, welcome to Next Gen Doers.
Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be here.
Of course. So, at the time of our conversation right now, you're on the brink of heading to the 70th session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. How are you feeling about that?
I'm excited. As you said, it's the 70th session, so it's a little nerve-wracking that 7 years in, we're still discussing such basic things such as women's rights, gender equality, but it is the main space at the UN where we discuss gender, and I myself have been attending for several years. So to me, it's more than just thinking about the UN, the negotiations, but about being in community with amazing activists that are feminists, that are working at the intersection of gender equality and a multitude of other topics. And it's always just a pleasure to be in New York and we connect with people from all over the world. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I mean that community that you've built over the years as well. I'm sure there's a lot of power and inspiration that comes from it. But you've been on global stages since your late teens, which is a pretty unique experience. What do you think is something that people assume about that kind of, lifestyle, if you will, that's a myth, that's totally wrong?
There's many. I think it can definitely be a lifestyle that seems very glamorous, especially when we're just seeing what's on social media or, what this global stages presents. And even the UN itself, right? One of the main rooms at the United Nations is the General Assembly Hall, which is all gold and it's so beautiful. It's basically a photo op ready,
Mhm.
to happen.
Mhm.
And so these spaces, they can feel very glamorous, but the reality, at least of the conferences, is much deeper, right? We're discussing deep global challenges, global issues, whether it's climate change, whether it's solving disasters, whether it's gender inequality. And so it's definitely a fun lifestyle to be able to go from conference to conference and be in community with incredible people. But I think something that people don't often know is the depth and the weight of the work that goes on to be in these spaces, whether it's funding,
Mhm.
as someone coming from Brazil, conferences were almost never there. Now we've had COP30 in Brazil, which was an amazing change to take a domestic flight for such a big international conference. But I think in general, you go into these spaces, you are carrying the weight of maybe funders or sponsors that have brought you in and you have things to deliver. You're bringing your jet lag. Sometimes you're bringing stress from school or work that you couldn't do as you were getting ready for that opportunity. So I think just like anything in life that involves, big travels or big moments like that requires a lot of compromise. And I think that's maybe something that people might not realize about being able in those global stages
Mhm.
is the compromise it takes when you are there, what you cannot do, whether it's relaxing, just resting after a long week, or even being with friends and doing your normal young people activities.
I feel like we're gonna get into that a bit later for sure, but what keeps you up at night?
Wow, many things keep me up at night. I I tend to sleep quite late, and I think also part of the sleep hygiene that I've been trying to maintain is not look a lot of the news or a lot of social media before bed, because otherwise I
Mm.
have so many thoughts. I'm overthinking so many things. I mean, definitely the bigger question, which, is centered around my work, is how we're going to solve this crisis that we're dealing with. I mean, there's so many of these crises, but when it comes to climate, I think it can feel like such a helpless scenario, right? Because you can do your Zoom meetings, you can attend the conferences, you can work on incredible local impactful projects, but the issue is so much bigger than any of us. It's so systemic that I often catch myself thinking, what am I actually doing to contribute? How can we do more? What's needed? And I know these are big questions. And so it's why I actually try to spend some of my resting time, my weekends, not looking at climate things, not watching the climate documentaries, and just kind of veering off all of that, because it does keep me up at night. And coupled with conflicts, coupled with so much inequity, coupled with so much negative change that we're seeing in the world, as someone that's an optimist by nature, is really difficult. And so I think we have to catch ourselves and hold ourselves onto the good things, the little things, whether it's, a nice tea before going to bed. But I would say the climate crisis keeps me up at night.
So fair, so fair. And for our listeners, I have to say, I have seen Renata at COP 28, I think it was, and at the UN General Assembly sidelines just this past year. Renata is one of those people who you will see with a smile on her face constantly and so energized all the time. Um, and she's on it constantly. And it honestly gives me a sense of peace knowing that there's a pause in all the climate news and general news that you're consuming because that energy, it requires rest.
100%, 100%. I mean, I definitely think, as you said, I'm on when I'm in these spaces. I know how to almost flip a switch in that sense. I'm going to New York now for CSW, and I know that there's days that are gonna start at 7 a.m. with meetings and end at 11 p.m. with receptions, right? And for those types of
Mhm.
situations, you have to be on. You're talking with fundraisers, you're talking with policymakers, you're talking with people from so many different places, and you almost need to not bring a different persona, but you got to bring your all your extrovertedness and
A game.
energy, right, into having those conversations. And I'm pretty comfortable with English, but it's still my second language, and so sometimes it can take a little while, or sometimes you're tired at the end of the day, and so it definitely takes just being on. But when these conferences end, I cannot tell you just how much time I need to just be in my own space and rest and unwind. Otherwise, I burn out. And so it's really important to live within these two worlds and make time to rest, as you said.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier about, being from Brazil, and I think that the Brazilian part of your identity, it really does shine through a lot of your work and your representation on global stages. And I'd really love to know if there was a part of your upbringing in Brazil that shaped, let's say, your justice compass.
I love that question. I mean, Brazil is such a special country. I cannot even begin to explain how special it is to be born and raised there. And I mean, it's such a diverse country in the sense that I'm from the south of Brazil, which is so different, for example, from the north of Brazil, from the Amazon, or the northeast, or the southeast. Every area is different in terms of climate, in terms of foods, in terms of accents. Everything changes because it's such a continental country. And so my Brazil that I grew up in included a lot of cold days as well, and a lot of weather changes, because my part of Brazil has a harsher winter, let's say, than the rest of Brazil. It doesn't snow or anything, but it does get chilly. And so you learn to live within different climates early on, because it's very hot in the summer, it's very cold in the winter. In my hometown, it rains so much. And I mean, a lot of people know we had our worst flood, which was one of the biggest climate disasters in history of Brazil in 2024. that flooded our entire state. It closed our airport for 8 months. It displaced 600,000 people. So, I mean, to me, that's a culmination of what I've seen growing up of just these crazy weather changes that keep getting exacerbated by climate change. But that's kind of the part that alarmed me to the different stages of nature or the different challenges that we can have living in such a diverse place, climate wise, biome wise. But I think in terms of justice and in terms of my work with communities, it's shaped me in such a positive way in the sense of seeing so many different people. I mean, Brazil has an inequality that's impossible to ignore. And so you grow up with such different pockets of like social realities in your own city, or if you just go outside to different places. And so you learn early on that, at least in my case, that I had a lot of privilege of being able to go to school every day, to access, time with my family and have a loving family, or even learn English as I did as a child. I mean, that's pretty rare in Brazil. And so there's a lot of privileges that I've had and accesses that I've had growing up in Brazil that have shaped how I want to use that access in the world and how I want to navigate the world. And so I grew up seeing my mom, do a lot of volunteer work. She used to take care of stray dogs. So it was, what was she like doing? So
Oh,
we would have like 20 dogs in our house at a time that she would clean, take to the vets and then put them up for adoption. And so, yeah, I loved it. So I grew up with many dogs. So little things like that. It wasn't necessarily related to activism or climate. It was just something that my parents really fostered in me and my sister to look to your side and see that we need to be there for each other, to help each other, and to have that mindset of justice in any way that we can. And so I grew up with that. And I mean, it got to climate change much later on in my journey when I was starting college. But I would say growing up, I just always knew I wanted to be a part of that change, of that solution, no matter what it was. I didn't know what it was. I mean, I was in the student government in high school. I did, a lot of volunteering hours in schools for small children. So things like that have been a part of my
mhm,
growing up, and just coupled with the differences of Brazil, whether it's nature or the social justice situation, I think
mhm.
it's really framed and shaped who I am. And I try to bring that reality and tropicality and Brazilianness wherever I go. As hard as that sometimes is, I think it's important to bring that identity.
No, I see it through and through, and while we're on it, shout out Brazil, shout out mom and dad for their part in bringing you on this journey. So, I think it's fair to say that in so many different ways, you're a doer. EmpoderaClima definitely sticks out, of course. And you founded it when you were 22, I believe. And just for our listeners, how would you phrase the gap that EmpoderaClima exists to close?
I love that. Yes, I founded EmpoderaClima when I was 22 after at that point, I'd say 5 years or so already in the climate space. And something I had noticed already as a young person navigating high level global climate spaces for that many years is that these spaces lacked youth leadership. It lacked even women's presence. It wasn't an equal space in terms of decision making, in terms of the negotiators
Mhm.
that were on the table. And it also lacked a lot of people from developing countries, from the global south, from Latin America. And so the gap that EmpoderaClima sought to close when it first started, and it's still doing that, it's this gap in access to these spaces. And education is kind of the motto and the way forward to close that gap, because I've noticed that a lot of people are incredibly talented, they're incredibly motivated, but sometimes you lack the tools and resources because of maybe where you were born or where you grew up in or just what you had access to. And then you're not able to be using your voice and elevating and echoing your voice in these spaces. And so I saw that
Mhm.
difference in the realities that I had in my home country of Brazil versus what I saw, for example, at COP21, which was the first UN climate conference I attended over 10 years ago at this point. And so that just became very clear to me. Yeah, there's a gap in access of the people that are generally most affected by climate change or that are feeling in disproportionate separate ways, whether it's trying to access, menstrual products during a flood and not being able to because your decision makers didn't think about it, or whether it's
Hmm.
having access to go to school when, there's puddles of water and you're not able to walk to school that day, or you're not able to have the infrastructure to study in times of climate crisis. So that's what we've been doing ever since at this point for over 7 years, which is crazy.
So cool. It's so, so cool. I'm curious because you did say the climate portion of, your concepts of justice, for instance, like they came up later on, like around the time of going to college, though you've always been engaged. Was there an example or an event that made this link between climate, gender, education, and youth involvement undeniable for you?
Yes, I think there's a couple of key moments that kind of put everything together because I studied international relations in college, and I knew I wanted to deal with global problems, but I had no idea. I remember I picked up this very thick book about China and I was like, maybe I'll just study China and that's gonna be what I do as I was fascinated by it. I had no idea what I was gonna work on. I think, we at least in my years growing up and being in school, we didn't talk about climate at all in school. I remember we talked about the dengue and how we needed to take care to not leave water around different places in our house, and how heat could also bring diseases. We talked about recycling. So really it was connected, but I don't think I understood that connection until I got to college. And I got to college at such a crucial time, which was 2015, when the 2030 agenda for the United Nations was adopted, right? So the UN,
Of course.
the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And as you know, I was in New Jersey. I was very close to New York City because I did 2 years of my undergrad in the US, and then I ended up transferring back to Brazil and graduating there. But I was so close to everything, and I basically saw things taking shape. Like multiple people saying, you have to memorize these 17 global goals, climate action, gender inequality, education, all these things that we need to solve by the year 2030. And it was the same year that the Paris Agreement was adopted. So the same year that
Right.
biggest global climate agreement that we have was adopted. And I had the opportunity to be a part of that. So I was near the UN when the SDGs were adopted. I was at COP21, which is, yeah, again, crazy to think about, but I had started my activism. I joined an NGO. I didn't know if I was going to do something with urbanism or climate or gender. I had no idea, but it all kind of came together. And especially during COP21, because I truly just went without knowing what to expect. I was 18 at the time, and I remember just being there looking at the incredible infrastructure that Paris had put on for a COP, and just thinking, okay, what am I
Right.
doing here? What is the purpose of this? And just trying to understand that. And it clicked when I attended a negotiation on gender and climate and noticed that that's one of the topic areas that they were discussing for the Paris Agreement, because they have so many. They have climate mitigation, finance, etc. And it just seemed interesting to me because I think I've just been surrounded by powerful women in my life and just always have considered myself a feminist. And so it seemed exciting that I could work around the two and women and climate action. But when I got there, I saw exactly that gap that we were talking about, which is
Mm-hmm.
a room that was majority made of men, a lot of white men, a lot of older men making the decisions. And I think worst of all, not even, in pro of the gender and climate justice that we're talking about. A lot of them were saying,
Oh.
this is not relevant. Why are we discussing gender at a climate conference? Let's take it out of the agreement. So
Oh my god.
I saw that
Whoa.
with my own eyes. And of course, a lot has changed. And I think we've evolved so much from that first moment of what came to be the Paris Agreement versus now in 2026. But I do still think a lot of people have a hard time understanding why climate the climate crisis is a social justice issue. So to me, it just
Mm.
clicked. I was angry. I came back to Brazil and I was like, we need to talk more about this. No one's talking about this. It wasn't on the news. No one was talking about COP. No one was talking about gender and climate. So thankfully, things have gotten better and it's more in the public eye. But I would say that was such a defining moment for me.
Whoa, I mean, yeah, I would be so angry after hearing that, but what's really cool is you took that anger, what you absorbed from that conversation, what was missing, and then you were building on it. And even, heading into to COP 21 and kind of still figuring things out, right? Like what exactly is that I'm going to focus on? And you found the thing that, clicked for you, positively or negatively so, and you went and did something about it. But here's the thing, I'm sure that wasn't an easy journey, and I'm betting that listeners and I would love to know what's been the hardest part about building EmpoderaClima or even leading it nowadays, 7 years on.
Yeah, I think what's important to mention too, because I mentor and talk to a lot of younger people that maybe want to create their own projects or want to do something, is each person has their own journey, and for me things really took time. So this event that I went to and that changed a lot of my perspectives was in 2015, and Empodera Clima came in 2019. So it took me
Mhm.
a couple of years to even mature the idea, because I didn't want to, even back then, duplicate ideas or you know not join forces with other incredible groups that were already doing this. So I did a lot of volunteering work at different organizations around Brazil, around the US where I was based at the time, because I just wanted to understand if the gaps that I saw were being tackled, and if so, how, and to see how I could
Mm.
contribute. So Empodera Clima really came because I noticed, okay, we're still not having this Latin American tropicalized kind of perspective to this issue. A lot of times it is global north focused, whether it's European or US based organizations looking at it, which is okay too. But I do think there's a different perspective that you are able to bring when you're speaking to people in their own languages. So at Empodera Clima, since the start, we've always done things in multiple languages. So Portuguese and Spanish have been with us from the beginning, then English and French, because that's the idea. It's to reach people and bring them with you to these spaces. You need to reach them where they are. You need to speak their language. You need to make things more accessible. And so it just took a couple of time to realize that that's what was missing, and even just the way of communicating it. So it didn't come as a big, let's say, let me found a big nonprofit and become a social entrepreneur or anything like that. It was just like, okay, what can I do to help? It was in my head for so many years. Sometimes I kind of let it slide and was, focusing on other things, but it always came back. And I think that's when you know that you need to do something about it. And I mean, yeah, it's been 7 years and I still love the work. I love the impact they were able to have. I love spending Saturdays with my team doing online meetings, and
Aw,
it just tells me that, it was the right choice in that sense. But of
yeah.
it does not come without hardships, as you said. And I think, oh, I could spend hours listing the the challenges of, being a nonprofit leader, being someone that's, still in their 20s trying to figure it all out and trying to get paid and paid the bills while doing this work
Mm.
that's often not seen as, let's say, paid work, or not seen as something that you should make a living out of, right? Because it's the cute activism sometimes people see, as the performative activism, you post on social media, whatever. But no, it's real work that's changing people's lives. But it's hard to fundraise for it. It's hard to sometimes get people on board, although I will say we have a lot of amazing partners, because I think when people see that you're passionate about something and they see that you have a mission and you have goals, they will support you. And so we've been fortunate enough that early on we've gotten the support of some big organizations, not even financially, but just to be our allies and come with us to different events, workshops, things that we've done over the years. But yeah, it's not easy to manage volunteers. It's not easy to navigate this underfunded space and to work with so many, issues that unfortunately are being more contentious, right? Whether it's climate, whether it's gender, it's a multitude of issues that is never easy to work with, but I think more than ever, it's something that we need to persist with because it's so important. But I love the work despite all the challenges.
Yeah. And it shows. It totally shows. Could you tell me about a moment that you were really proud of, let's say, a project or a campaign that EmpoderaClima has done?
Definitely. I will mention our latest one, which I spent most of my 2025 focused on, which is this project called Mulheres pela Resiliência Climática. It means Women for Climate Resilience. And that came out of that scenario that I mentioned earlier on the May 2024 floods in Rio Grande do Sul, in my home state of Brazil, because it truly just showed not only our community, but the whole country that the climate crisis is here, right? I mean, when you have a flood like that, that disrupts everything. I mean, what happened at that time was that people from all over the country came to help, and people were in boats, people were sometimes in jet skis, like trying to like help others and come from different parts of the country, because it was, I think, such a visual of what the climate crisis can do, right? And even one of the famous visuals that we have from that time was actually a horse that was stranded in a roof of a nearby city.
Yes, I've seen
Yeah.
this.
You've seen it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
that horse was named Caramelo. Caramelo is like what we call like any like golden stray dog in Brazil, we call them like the caramel dog, the caramelo. So that's, people say that's like the symbol of Brazil. And so that horse was, named Caramelo. And it was such a symbol of, the lack of power that we have in that situation, right? And so to me and my team, because I mean, we spent months thinking about what we could do to help and what more we could do, not only, on the front lines to help, but in the long term, how can we make sure that we're better prepared for another flood like this or for different climate disasters? And what came to mind was that idea of power. Like, how can we empower ourselves and each other to deal with this, especially, again, from a youth and feminist perspective, because that's what we work with at EmpoderaClima. And so we launched this project, the Women for Climate Resilience Project, where we delivered disaster preparedness trainings in different parts of Brazil. So we went to Belém, where COP was in the Amazon last year. We went to Recife in the Northeast that also had devastating floods a couple of years prior. And we went to my hometown, to Porto Alegre. And basically, we ended up training around 100 women that are so diverse in their backgrounds. And so we had fisher women, we had indigenous women, we had rural women, just women from all backgrounds that were already leading the change in their communities, were already incredibly resilient, and each one of them had their own stories. But the goal was to bring them together to create that network, that community. And over 2 days, we did multiple trainings with the civil defense of these different cities and state on what to pack in an emergency bag when a situation like that happens. We did training on mental health and care and how to deal personally and mentally with these scenarios as well. We did training on gender and climate activism, on community resilience, and what's amazing about it wasn't even just delivering that, because we were just facilitating it. We got some funds from an award the year prior. We delivered it, but everyone that we hired to deliver the trainings are local women that are leading the changes themselves. And so truly we just brought them together, and the rest is what they did. And so I'd say that was a really proud moment. I got to go in person to all of these workshops. And even a couple of these women came to COP30 in Belém. We hosted this high level breakfast with decision makers, and they got to tell their stories and how much, how much resilience they've had in their own journeys as women. And everyone cried. It was like the whole thing. And so
Oh my god.
it just showcases the strength, the power, the resilience that women naturally have. I think everyone can, that everyone knows a strong woman out there, that it may not be that they survived, a disaster, but in their own lives, in their own marriages, I mean, we could go on and on, right? Talking about how powerful women are. And so that moment just showcased to me how much collective feminist power does to solving things. And I think if we had those women in power, in the city hall, state governments, federal governments, we wouldn't be in a lot of the bad situations that we're in just because of how incredible, how resilient, how innovative, creative they are.
I was just going to say a little bit louder for the people in the back, please. But I would have loved to have just been a fly on the wall of that breakfast. That sounds beautiful. You mentioned earlier that part of some of the, let's say, hurdles of leading um, and building EmpoderaClima, you pointed to the fundraising aspect of things as well. But I think what's really interesting is you're a leader, but you're also an advocate in a lot of ways, and it's no secret that a lot of young people on global stages and in multilateral forums have to not only advocate for the causes and the people that they're representing, but also themselves. And this is something that I don't think, unless you have proximity to these spaces, that people are super aware about. This is probably really tough because you're still learning the ropes, right? Like you mentioned earlier in our conversation, like you might be a student, so you still have coursework to do. You might be working on the side, so you've got deliverables to be working on, but you're also there representing. Tell us about a time that you had to, let's say, advocate for yourself to do the work that you're doing to deliver, a campaign.
Oh, there's so many times. I mean, yeah, as you said, we're advocating for these global issues, but we're also advocating for ourselves 100%. Because I think institutions more and more have understood that they need diversity, whether it's intersectionality in terms of race, gender, class, that's needed because it's going to be a better outcome, right? If you have different minds thinking together. But on the youth side, on that kind of intergenerational side of things, I think we've learned and we've heard so much in our lives to listen to our elders, which is so important, right? And it's such a big thing to take lessons from those that came before us. But we should also listen to the young people, right? I mean, maybe everyone has had the experience of talking with a child or a teenager and just being like, wait, that's such a good point, or "Oh, you're so brilliant," because there's such incredible perspectives that different ages can bring to the conversation that may be different. They may not be based on decades of research or decades of work experience, but they're based on seeing the problem with a different lens or with a new lens, a creative lens. And so there's so much power in that. And institutions, I think, sometimes fail to see how much power and knowledge relies on young people because they are including young people, but a lot of the times it is symbolic because, like any other intersectionality, it's what you're supposed to do these days, right? And, you gotta have it. And, sometimes I still see like those all male panels, but it's like something that in 2026 can't fly, right? Like, come on, like you need to have at least a 50-50 balance. And so people are becoming
Yeah.
more aware of that because you have to. Otherwise, you're literally just speaking to the same people that have been responsible for making the decisions on our behalf in the past. So I think in terms of advocating for myself, there's so many situations where I've either been asked to be the one taking notes in a meeting rather than being the one that is speaking and having this conversation. And it still happens. It happened to me actually a couple weeks ago. So it's still out there. And I'm on the older side. I have a master's degree. I have a lot of work experience. So even then, you're still put into that box. And so something that I always talk about is how that box of being labeled youth is really good in terms of penetrating spaces that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. And I know myself having gone to so many wild spaces that I wouldn't have imagined being a part of or speaking at, such as, the World Economic Forum, Forbes, spaces that are kind of meant to be away from the civil society actors and for the private sector leaders, those that are making big decisions. So it's good in that sense that you're able to join these spaces. But at the same time, the box can be very challenging, very tricky, because when you're put into that box, there's just some blockade that people a lot of times can't see you for the value that you have. And so advocating for myself, for my team has happened so many times. I mean, it's either what I told you of being sidelined in actual closed boardrooms and meetings, or maybe being invited to speak at a really incredible room full of decision makers I've had situations where they've crossed my name out after I was already there, like, sorry, we had no time. You come, you get prepared at multiple COPs and multiple events where they will not prioritize your talk over everyone else. Or even you do get to speak sometimes, but then you see the decision makers leaving the room because they're like, I've made my talk. Sorry, now I have to go to the next thing. And so they don't listen. And so, I
Yeah.
laugh, but because it's so tragic and it's nerve-wracking and it's infuriating, right? Because then that's what becomes performative because you can do the speech, you post on social media, sure, it happened, but did they listen, right? Listening is so, so important. And I think sometimes people are just truly just checking the boxes, right? The youth boxes
Mhm.
checked. And I've seen that in my journey, unfortunately, more often than not, although there have been some allies and those that pay young people for their time, those that really listen to you and want to help you grow and want to help you get into different spaces, want to introduce to other people. I mean, those are the incredible allies that you find along the journey, and you got to hold on to those and perhaps get away from the other ones.
Yeah, fair. So fair. I am recalling actually seeing that image of, let's say, the older generations of speakers in certain spaces getting up and leaving. And I think I was at a particular event dedicated to youth during the UNGA this past year. And it just drove the whole thing home for me. That kind of like tokenization of youth almost. And granted, these were ministers and I'm sure they have very busy agendas. But absolutely, there is that intergenerational conversation. Those spaces are key. And folks like yourself, for instance, who have had to work to get into these spaces to begin with, and there are flights to be taken, there are visas to be filled out for so many people. I think some compensation, of course, and then listening at the end of the day, if you're already in the room, is key. But I am glad to hear that there have been some allies along the way. I think you mentioned you're kind of at the top end now towards that youth category. No comments on age or anything like that, but there is that designation of what is considered a youth. I've noticed that there's this really interesting moment when a young person or a young leader is entering that stage of phasing out of that youth category. How is the work you're doing now transforming as you exit that youth category?
That's such an important question. I talk to a lot of people, a lot of friends about this because yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everything has some temporary factor to it. And again, no specific comments on age, right? Because you can make change at different ages. But the reality is that let's say a lot of opportunities internationally, fellowships, grants, scholarships, they often have a cutoff date, which I think is good in a way because then you can transition to your next phase, right? Which is what I'm currently trying to get at. And it's funny because I've built my trajectory for so long in the youth space, I've gotten so used to, going to all these global spaces and being called the youngest person in the room or, like having that like light shine on me. And as you get older, then you notice you're no longer that person, which is awesome. Now you have teenagers, children that are occupying these spaces too, and you need to make space for that. And so I think that's something I reflect a lot about because one of my main things in working in the climate space and building EmpoderaClima has always been about legacy. And so I talk a lot about it. Sometimes use a quote from the Hamilton musical in my talks that talks about legacy. That says legacy is the planting the seeds in a garden you never get to see. And so it's that idea.
Wow.
You're planting, you're building, right? And maybe you won't see it flourish in your lifetime or in this current work that you're doing, but you've planted the seeds. And that's so
Oh
important.
my gosh.
That's so important because
Yeah.
we're not going to solve climate change overnight, right? And moments like seeing your hometown underwater, like, you know, get you in a mind space of like, okay, am I doing anything that's leading anywhere? And that's what I felt. I definitely had a couple of weeks where I was like, okay, why are we doing, these webinars, these events? And then people have lost their homes because of climate change. Like, you lose your sense a little bit there. And so you have to go back to, no, you're doing the long ride. You're taking the long ride, right? And education is the
Yeah.
long ride. Investing in young people is the long ride because these young people, um, hopefully now, but if not, in the near future, will become those decision makers that we vote for, that we elect. And we're already seeing that a little bit all over the world, right? Where it's young Congress people, young mayors, young people that are taking over that probably were invested in earlier on, not even just, financially, but people believed in them somehow. And therefore, they're now in these spaces. And so I hone my current moment into continuing to build that power and that legacy, no matter what brand I'm under. I don't think it's ever going to change that I'm going to be someone that's an ally to young people and believes in young people. So I hope I get to be someone that's, in a decision making space somewhere someday where I can, hire that 18-year-old and be like, let's hear what you have to say and let's change the scenarios, right? I think our generation
Yeah.
this and should be the one to do this. So that's what I try to hold myself onto, that legacy aspect.
I really dig that. I mean, I got goosebumps at that Hamilton quote. By the way, I have never watched Hamilton. Maybe I should change that. But that gave me goosebumps because, sometimes when people have to do things or they choose to do something rather than start something, there's usually an incentive of, I'm going to see this change happen. But what you've mentioned is like a multi generational push and admitting to yourself that you might not see all the changes that you hope to see within your own lifetime, but that my effort right now counts towards getting to that point. I think that's so powerful and that's incredibly inspiring. So
Thank
thanks for sharing that.
No, of
Yeah.
course. Of course. It's not easy work, right? To work in this space. And so you gotta find the things that kind of resonate with you and keep you going. Cause otherwise, it's hard because yeah, if you're watching the news, if you're reading the news, it's like so much going on. So you gotta understand that it is, as you said, I love the idea of a multi-generational push, multi-stakeholder push. Like nothing's gonna solve anything on their own. It's not gonna be
Yeah.
civil society or just government or just the private sector. But if we don't somehow try to find consensus or do something together, it's not gonna happen, right? And so it has to be that big push. And I hope more people can get on board in that sense and work.
Mm, I like it. Slight pivot. I I saw that at Harvard Kennedy School and then later on at the World Bank, a lot of your, let's say, seminal work was focused on climate resilience. What made you focus on that topic? I mean, it wasn't obviously a far fetch from the work that you had been doing with EmpoderaClima, but there was a slight shift as well, expansion, if you will. I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question because it's definitely, as you said, been a focus in the past, let's say, 4 years or so. I mean, the reality is when we discuss climate change, we often discuss either mitigation, right? What are we going to do to reduce the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is so important, right? And that involves so much technology, and there's all these different ways that you can try to achieve that reduction. But there's also something called climate adaptation because the reality is that climate change is already happening, as we've been discussing, and we need to do something about it. Right? It's not only about preparing for the future; it's dealing with the present. Because
Mhm.
to me, that's what's really interwoven with social justice. It's people that are already feeling it, which is unequal. That's what climate justice means at the global level, right? It's some parts of the world are feeling it more than others. And even, like countries in Europe or the US, you are feeling it and you see that some neighborhoods or some parts of the country feel it more than others. And so that's what climate adaptation and resilience focuses on is how can we focus on supporting people so that they can be better prepared given a scenario where a climate disaster is already set to happen because we know that we have all these floods, all these droughts, all these heat waves that come our way, these blizzards, every big weather change, right? And so knowing how to prepare best for that, having that access to the resources, is key because that will reduce so much of the destruction. I don't think people fund or realize that enough. And it's not even me just thinking, just looking at the statistics, you see that foundations, governments, institutions, they often put a lot of money into the reconstruction of a disaster.
Right.
Always, right? And there's many problems with that. There's even something that I wrote on my thesis called the CNN effect, which is people want to do that because that will make the news in the first 24 hours after a disaster. But isn't that so messed up? Where
It's yeah, prevention is better than cure. We literally grow up hearing these kinds of sayings.
exactly, exactly. And it's the same with climate, but it's often more silent or perhaps more invisible. If you are investing into, providing cash transfers for your community so they can prepare their meals and stock up on their fridges before a disaster hits and they can't leave their homes, you are saving these people from hunger and you are making sure they're healthy and safe during that situation where they can't leave, right? So that's just one example. But again, sometimes you don't see that.
Mm.
Governments can't maybe, be sharing all of that in a more media savvy way rather than the reconstruction. But we need to change our mindset because even economically, it is better if you invest money before a disaster rather than after. You save so much. The data changes it from time to time, but people say if you invest $1 in prevention, you save up to $7 in reconstruction. So I mean, come on. For the economists out there, right? It's just smarter to
Literally.
literally. So that's, I mean, to me, that just makes so much sense. It's aligned with my purpose. It's connected to the justice side of what I do. It's connected to the social side of what I do. And so it just makes sense that, especially after a scenario of what happened in my hometown, even though I started this work before, we were already seeing all the time in the news unprecedented floods, unprecedented. Every time it's unprecedented, right? I think that's the other thing with our generation is that everything that happens is unprecedented because we're living through, shock after shock or breaking news, breaking records. Every year is the hottest year on record. I don't know if anyone pays attention to this, but it's not even a record anymore. Every year is going to be the hottest because it's getting warmer. So
Yeah.
we need to deal with that and we need to adapt now. And so to me, climate adaptation is the work that we need to be focusing on the most.
I just wonder if we need like a adaptation is sexy campaign, you know? Like, do we need to glamorize climate adaptation at this point? I'm hopeful. I am ever hopeful that, through conversations that might not even catch the limelight, that the case will be made very clear. But yeah, I hope the wake up call is sooner rather than later, because as the youth say, we are tired of living through unprecedented times.
Exactly, exactly. And I will say, I mean, there's people that are on the more technical side. We need to reduce emissions, as I said, but it's so amazing to work in climate resilience because you just see the creativity of people. Like anything can be climate resilience, right? It's like building a small wall so that the water doesn't go through your home, like anything. And so
Yeah.
there's such incredible conversations that you have when you're in this space and you just hear of how different communities around the world are dealing with it. And so I think it brings people together. It's exciting. It can often involve culture. It can involve traditional knowledge. I think it's awesome. So yes, we need to make climate adaptation sexy again for sure.
Let's chat about that afterwards. But so part of your work, at least I perceive it as it's kind of a public presence as well, right? Besides the doing that you're doing on the ground, there is a public presence of speaking and on social media. And I personally love and enjoy all the Bad Bunny references that you make. And it's usually like mixed in with, hard hitting work that you're doing, always undeniably optimistic and very action oriented. But social media is no doubt a very difficult place to be in for long periods of time and then also to work in for reasons that are pretty well documented at this point, I would say. How did you decide to show up on social media and balance that with your well being?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because I mean, everyone is somehow connected to social media, right? Even if you personally chose to not have it, let's say someone around you is scrolling on their Instagram or on their social media. And so this is our world currently, right? Not just social media, but just being connected. And to me, I think the over connectiveness, because the work can be so heavy, because it's so energy draining sometimes when you go to these conferences, you're meeting thousands of people, you're speaking different languages, whatever else. I think I just find that I have this need to power up in some other way that's not scrolling because sometimes people talk about this, but about feeling more drained, right? When you're just scrolling and maybe seeing content that you don't want to see, that doesn't interest you. But at the same time, I do agree and believe that it is a powerful tool and actually started using more actively, not early on in my activism. I started using when I started my master's at Harvard because I was like, okay, what an incredible opportunity. What a dream come true. I need to show people that, I'm here, that it's possible, that, this is everyday life, kind of try to bring people closer to it. I felt the need because to me, it was such a surreal experience to be in a place like that I had dreamed of for so long. I was actually there. I was one of the only Brazilians in, the entire School of Public Policy and the only one in my program. And so I was like, okay, let's bring people closer together, and I started having amazing conversations with people that then went to apply, or that wrote to me that they got the courage to apply to these big things, because my whole thing is apply anyway, try anyway, because people that know me, before did my masters, know that I thought it was a joke to be in a place like Harvard or apply to these Ivy Leagues, because I thought it couldn't be further away from what I could do. But it's important to have not just role models, but people that tell you it's a normal thing. You can do it. Like we're not superheroes. You know what I mean? We're regular people doing regular things, because I think there's all this stigma, whether it's the UN, whether it's the global stages, whether it's the Ivy League spaces, whatever it is, whether it's all the travel. So it's important to me to showcase the reality of it all. Of course, if you're just really tired on a Sunday in your PJs in bed, I'm not posting that because no one is. But at the same time, if you can at least have conversations with people and have interactions where you can just bring it all closer to everyone else, to me, that's the most exciting part. So I definitely fluctuate. Sometimes,
Mhm.
it's an exciting space and I share it with a lot of people. I just shared recently on social media on my stories that I've started moving more, working out every day, and I'm feeling so good. And a lot of people responded like, "Me too. Let's keep each other accountable." So it's awesome for that too. You're connecting because
Yeah.
I'm not often in a place with a lot of my friends. I have friends scattered all over the world, so it's hard to have community in one place, which is, I think, the not so good side of being, such a global person. But I think in social media, you can find community and you can find opportunities. I'm not going to lie, because when you are able to put your portfolio out there, not just on, Instagram, but, the LinkedIn, which I know is like a love and hate relationship. A lot of my friends hate it, it's useful, and, you can network and you can build bridges that way. So I think you have to take it with a grain of salt, and you got to find what works for you. And for me, I know that if I'm scrolling too much, I will get anxious and it's not going to be good for me, right? And so I've tried to learn how to get on it when I have something to share, or when I want to connect with people, or just try to have that balance and, pick up a book, go to a yoga class, whatever it is. It's hard. It's not easy, because I remember, especially when I was even busier in grad school, at the end of a long day, you just need to let it all go. And so I would just, be there scrolling. But I would encourage people that are listening that are maybe struggling with that. Don't feel the pressure to always be online or always post, because I get that from friends that said, you're always doing so much and always posting. But that's often not the exact reality. Maybe I'm posting late, or maybe I took several hours to record that 20-second video that I posted on Instagram, and it's not so great. And so I think sharing that and just building more reality in these spaces is super important to me. So
Absolutely. And I think the weird thing is that social media itself has changed so much, I think, in the last couple of years. And yeah, our relationship with it and its like entrenchment in our lives and, livelihoods being attached with it as well. It is going to be one of those things that we learn to balance. But it's really great to hear that you've, kind of intentionally also distanced the everyday usage of it as well. But I know it's a balancing act, right? It takes time.
exactly. It's a work in
Yeah.
progress. We're all just learning how to
Yeah.
live daily with technology. And WhatsApp for me is another one. I don't know if anyone relates, but WhatsApp in Brazil is like our main form of communication. And so I wake up and I have dozens and dozens of WhatsApps to answer. And it's not only friends, I mean, it's work. My work at EmpoderaClima, it's often on WhatsApp. And so it's really hard because when else in history were we always plugged in, right? In the
True.
sense of it's 10 p.m., you're, at home watching something and work can come in because people are just messaging whenever they want. And so still learning how to find that balance. It's definitely a work in progress, but an important one for me for sure.
Yeah. Some of our listeners here might be thinking about building a youth led initiative. What would you say is the first thing that they should focus on? Like the problem, the people, like the team, partnerships, even? And is there a myth that you would like to bust right here, right now about starting and leading an initiative?
Important questions. I definitely get asked this a lot about, should I build my own initiative? What should I think about? I would say definitely think about the problem because these days there's so many organizations doing incredible work, right? Whether it's youth organizations, climate organizations, whatever you work in or whatever area that you think about, there's probably something out there. And so I'm a deep believer that we need to work more together rather than just, again, duplicate efforts and create things that are similar in nature or that you actually might even end up competing, which is sounds weird on profit space, but it happens actually a lot. And so you're competing for resources or for grants or whatever it is. And so you got to find something that's either unique to where you are or something unique to what can you do, right? And for me, it was that combo of having opportunities and access to these spaces with learning and studying for a few years on gender and climate and not seeing that conversation happening all around Brazil. So even at EmpoderaClima, we believe we are the first to have, this kind of comprehensive multilingual database on gender and climate 7 years ago. And now there's many incredible organizations coming together. But what I always try to say is just understand the problem, the issue that you're trying to tackle deeply before building an organization to see whether that's something that you can join in with someone else or another organization or start yourself. And I think everything else will follow, whether it's finding the people that will be passionate about that as well and want to help you with that mission or finding the scope or defining the vision. You just need to understand the problem and then you can build the partnerships. And in terms of myths, oh, there's so many because, nowadays, Empodera Clima is big. We're 50 volunteers. We have all these grants. We have all these projects, but it took time. So I think starting big and this idea that you need to start big with your nonprofit registration, with funding, with a whole team built out, with a whole branding book ready is a myth, 100%. Empodera Clima started as like a tab on a partner organization's website which supported us in getting started. And I'm so incredibly grateful because, again, if you come together with other people that have already started to do this work, it's so much easier. And you just kind of learn the ropes along the way. So, finding that mentorship and taking it day by day, understanding that you can't compare yourself to maybe someone that has a ton of funding or maybe is in a different country where the resources are easy because for example, in Brazil, opening a nonprofit or registering yourself as a nonprofit, your organization is a very difficult process. I think we started talking about it in early 2022, and the registration came in December 2024, actually on my birthday on December 9th, randomly, which was crazy.
Whoa. Oh my gosh.
I know. So it takes a while. I mean, of course, we took a long time to even find a pro bono law firm to help us and do all of that. But before that, we kind of just started to do the work. We had the website, we had a volunteer designer, then we changed the logo a little bit. So you kind of built little by little. Of course, not everyone has to do it like that, but I was 22. I was just out of college and I was like, okay, we need to get this started and we'll see what happens. And so now is the time, 7 years in, that we're even starting to understand in a more robust manner how you measure impact in the more kind of different ways and qualitative methods, etc. So I was definitely not a social impact expert when I started. I still am not, but you just learn along the way. And whatever you can't do, which at least for me, it's a lot that I can't do, you find the people that are better at you at it and you bring them with you. And so that's what I've done in my journey. It didn't start big, and that's a myth. You just need a problem that you want to solve and the passion to do it and to spend time with. tackling it because it's a lot of work as well.
And I mean, the word that kept coming to mind as you were, telling us about that is scrappy. Like, be scrappy and start. I think that's a big one. Get started, and things will build and snowball along the way. But you just have to get started to get that momentum going,
Agree, 100%. I can tend to be
right?
a perfectionist sometimes, but I'm telling you, you will never achieve that perfection because it doesn't exist, right? And you have to embrace that imperfection. So there's definitely always things that could be better. But I think what's allowed me to continue to do this work and to go through different situations and manage volunteers, which is not easy because you're trying to get people that are so busy in their own lives to come together, is that nothing is crazy urgent that you need to kind of lose sleep over it. You just take it day by day. If that hasn't been built yet, we're gonna do it. And you just kind of go at your own pace. And that has helped me kind of keep momentum, but also take our time so no one gets burnt out, no one gets super anxious or stressed. Because to me, that's when we lose sight, which happens a lot, I know, in a lot of workplaces. But to me, then it's like, why are we volunteering our time? We're already doing this, a lot of us outside of our working hours or school hours. It needs to be joyful in some type of way, right? So what you said about the Bad Bunny and all of that, that's pretty important to me. I just went to a J Balvin concert earlier this week, which is another reggaeton star that I love. And so you gotta find these moments. And honestly, my motto this year, I'm going to a reggaeton festival later this year too. It's like find moments to find that joy for yourself. It doesn't have to be in your work, right? I think for me, a lot of times it was in my work because I love seeing, my friends in the spaces. I love talking about social justice and climate action. But you gotta also have stuff outside of that so you can keep your sanity amid these crazy times.
I absolutely love that. I'm actually going to take a page out of your book. We're nearing the end of our conversation over here, which breaks my heart because I'm really enjoying this. But let's take a moment of reflection. Your first COP was 10 years ago, and it was a pretty important one at that as well. How do you look back on this decade of work that you've been doing? Are you proud? Are you content?
I'm proud for sure. I think I had no idea I would kind of still be doing this 10 years later when I attended. Like I remember those moments at COP very vividly because it was so surreal being in that space. It wasn't just a regular, annual climate conference. It was one of the most important ones we'll ever have, right? And so seeing such a historical moment come to fruition and 10 years later see all that's come after that and all that I've been able to build with the help of a lot of my friends and yeah, just build those spaces has been so special. I sometimes think about that. I had that moment at COP 30 because COP 21 I attended with a youth delegation, but it was all very new to me, and there were definitely moments where I was more by myself, just trying to understand what was my place there. And, I was walking at COP 30 and I was like, whoa, like we're here. And I brought 15 young women with me. We had a house in Belém where we brought everyone together. A lot of them, it was their first time at COP. So it was a very full circle moment for me last year to walk across those halls, even though they're always different, they're always in different countries, but somehow in a weird way, COP always feels the same. And so I remember when I arrived in Belém and got off the plane into, the airport, it said like COP 30 Brazil. I was so emotional because I was like, okay, we never thought this could happen. It's like it's happening in our home country. People are speaking Portuguese. People are showcasing their culture. I mean, it was an incredible moment. So to me, that pride really comes true, and it definitely keeps you humble because 10 years have passed. Things are not getting any easier, right? And so I think climate work is slow, but it can be rewarding for sure, especially because of the people that you work with and the people that you're able to bring with you along the way. And that's something that I think I've gotten a lot of pride out of, just bringing others with me wherever and whenever I can.
I think we mentioned earlier, like the people, the allies that you have, and then peers who are doing similar work in different parts of the world. There's probably an energy that helps to make it familiar year on year in different countries as well.
Exactly. That might be it actually, because I remember even at COP 28 in Dubai when we saw each other, I remember I would walk and I would just see all my friends in the halls, and because I think COP 28 was also special in the sense that so many people attended. It was a big one. And so
Yeah.
everyone in that I knew from these global climate spaces were there. So it was honestly a big party. Like it was a big joyful moment, despite, of course, challenges of the actual negotiations and, all the criticisms that I have with also what COP has become and it being more of a festival rather than that. So when I say party, I say more that celebration of community, as you said, and just being with people that you love and you see on your computer screen, but that maybe once a year you get to see a cop and hug and have a coffee together and just, exchange kind of deeper things because to me that also keeps me going. As you said, it's the energy and passion that people from all generations truly bring to this space when we're all there for the same reason, which is trying to save our planet.
Absolutely. My final question for you is kind of a full circle moment from the question I asked towards the start of our conversation. I want to ask you, what gives you hope?
Good question. Good question as well. There's so many things that give me hope. As I said earlier, I like to think of myself as an optimist and as someone that goes through life with that positive energy because to me it's like what other choice do we have, right? We can choose to have a more negative mindset. And I know this also comes from a place of privilege, right? If I have food on the table and a place to sleep and I'm comfortable and happy and I'm supported by my family, whatever, it's easier to be more hopeful or motivated or have that positive energy. But because I have that opportunity, I choose to take it and to bring that to the places I go. And so what brings me hope is seeing that despite everything going around the world, change is happening in perhaps unexpected places or just in places that maybe are not your usual governments or your usual private sector companies, but there are incredible, amazing people doing the work, doing the change. And so those moments when I get to see that, whether it's a small project that's doing very small change in their community, or just hearing sometimes from one of my volunteers at EmpoderaClima, because they also do other work around their communities, and just seeing like the spark in their eye and what they're doing locally showcases to me that people are doing something right. And it's easy to forget with everything going on sometimes if you're scrolling too much on different social media, but there is hope in people and there's incredible people, especially incredible women that are leading that change. And so that's why I like to just be close to it, whether it's doing these workshops or going to these conferences, which is not always where the change is, right? Change is happening everywhere and sometimes it's little things. It may not be saving the planet, solving climate change, but it's small change like giving a younger person hope, like giving them an opportunity. The work that teachers do in schools, I mean, that gives me hope. I mean, education, like there's no more to say, right? I mean, at Empodera, we go to schools, we do this work, talking to to students, to teenagers about climate justice. But those teachers, they give me hope. And we actually went to a school in my home state where they were 4 meters underwater during the floods. So the school was destroyed. And when we went there to do one of our workshops, it was so beautiful, it was so colorful. Like they truly got to reconstruct themselves. And those young students, they were so happy, so excited to like learn about climate justice, get involved. And that gives me hope. It's like it's those people, they are climate survivors themselves and they're there, right? And not to romanticize or be uh, a blind optimist in that sense, because I like what Christiana Figueres, who was the executive secretary of the UN Climate Convention, says to be a stubborn optimist. I like that idea. It's like it's messy. It's not always going to be happy days. And I sometimes wake up really annoyed or have a headache from working too much the previous day, whatever it is. But be a stubborn optimist means pushing and pushing towards positive change, even when the tides are against you.
And not those everything that you bring to this conversation, I'm going to be taking it with me. Thank you so much for taking the time to tell us about your journey, about building EmpoderaClima, about the part of your journey that you're in right now, and for doing the work that you do. Thank you for being with us here on Next Gen Doers.
Thank you so much for the invite and just for the chance to share a more reflective side of things. So I'm really thankful for the space.
That was Renata Koch Alvarenga, founder of EmpoderaClima, eco-feminist, climate resilience advocate, and someone who has been doing this work since before most people knew what a COP was. There were a lot of moments in this conversation that stayed with me, but the one I keep coming back to is her idea of being a stubborn optimist. Not someone who ignores how hard things are, Renata is clear-eyed about that, but someone who makes a deliberate choice every day to push toward change anyways. She did that when her state flooded, and even when negotiations move slowly and the world feels like it might be going in the wrong direction. She also said something quietly powerful about legacy. Often, gratification is what drives people to build things, but Renata recognizes that much of her work, while impactful in the present, is about sowing seeds for big changes. And her advice for anyone thinking about building something? Start with the problem. Start scrappy. Don't wait until it's perfect because it never will be. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're enjoying Next Gen Doers, a review goes a long way in helping more people find the show. You can find Renata and EmpoderaClima in the show notes. Her work is worth following closely, especially if you're a reggaeton fan. Until next time, go do something.